Hello, in this video I'll be discussing Hatchet, which is the first book technically in the Brian saga, but it's just very much a standalone book as well. So this book, the quick spoiler-free review is that this book is perhaps the best survival kind of fiction that I've ever read, and I think it's really, really good. And my suspicion is it's slightly accurate. I think I've watched enough Survivor Man to be an expert in this field, so you can take my word for it that it's relatively accurate. But yeah, all jokes aside, I think that it's not outlandish fantasy like Swiss Family Robinson or anything crazy like that. But it's relatively grounded. It's got a little bit of character. You sort of understand Brian as a little bit as a person just through a couple of small things that I'll discuss in the spoiler section. But yeah, and it's just got like fun survival stuff. Sort of Brian making his way through wilderness. Character growth for him over the course of the thing, as well as just really sort of exploring the world. And you might think that's more of a kind of a fantasy series sort of thing, but of course the real world is actually also very fascinating, and so exploring various parts of it that you might not know so much about. For example, I'm no expert in the Canadian wilderness, is really, really interesting. So this book, the spoiler for reviewers, this book is fantastic. And I think as a book, it's probably something like an 8 out of 10, but I think as a constituent of its genre, I think it's probably like a 9.5 or 10 out of 10. I'm not really sure how much you could do better, other than, and this is my biggest criticism for every book in a series, other than the length. It's just so short. Come on, give me another, double the length. That's what I want. But obviously, you can't really hold a book to, you can't to account for being too short because it's so good. But yeah, so spoiler for review, this book is fantastic. So let's jump into spoilers. So the basic plot of the book is this guy, his parents get divorced because his mum's cheating on his dad. So he's going to fly to visit his dad in the Canadian oil fields. His plane goes down, and he has to survive in the Canadian wilderness for, a period of quite a few months. Or a couple of months, I think, maybe 2.5, something like that. And so this book, so Brian basically, there's kind of I'd say there's sort of 3 kind of sections of the book, so to speak. There's the first section, which is in a plane, and until Brian kind of lands and figures his life out, right, and starts getting food. So I'd say the first section kind of ends when he gets the gut cherries, right? And I'd say the second section is from when he gets the gut cherries to when he tries to kill himself with the hatchet. And then the third section is from then until the end of the book, I'd say. And I'd say that the sections kind of get stronger and stronger. So the first section, I'd say, is relatively, bear in mind, weak, just because you kind of don't really know that much about Brian yet, and he's just flying in a plane, and then he's not really that active of a protagonist yet, so, you're not really rooting for him as much yet. So the first sequence is relatively weak, but of course, it's just the start of a book, you can't really blame it too much, it's just setting stuff up. And then the second section is better, because it's Brian's sort of becoming an active protagonist, he's figuring out his environment, but he's still not... He's active, but he's not sort of as successful as you want. He's not as competent. So his competency is low, but his activity is relatively high. So it's fine. And depending on the sort of characters you enjoy, you might enjoy this more. But for me, I was waiting for him to really figure things out, which of course he does. In the third section of the book, which is after he sort of has his epiphany and becomes sort of in one with nature and much, much, much better at surviving. And once we get to this bit, this is my favorite part of the book because we have a super hyper proactive character who's also very competent and very driven, and you just sort of get to see him in his element, so to speak. Working, solving problems, helping himself, and just really just working well with himself to kind of deal with this shitty situation he's in. And of course, this is going to depend on your taste, right? If you like survival fiction or survival stories in general, then this book, I think, does it, like I said earlier, I think it does it as well as you basically possibly can. But I think that even if you don't, this book is at a level where you'll probably still enjoy it. You just might not get as much value out of it as I did. So yeah, in conclusion, the only kind of or just before I get to conclusion, I should say, the 2 negatives I can think about this book, like I said, is the very, very slightly weak opening sort of bit before Brian gets, but I mean, I'm serious, it's 8 pages or something, so not much to write home about. Then the other weakness I'd say is it is a little bit short. Of course, you can't really blame an author for, he told the story he wanted to tell and then he was done. I mean, there's not much more to, but I just say that I could have, because I listened to this in an audiobook, and the audiobook's 4 hours long and 3.5 hours long, and it's I could have done with a 10 hours of this, but, he told what he wanted to tell, and he was done. Well, caveat, he's not quite done, because in the next video, we'll be reviewing Brian's Winter, which is... So this I should say that this book ends with him getting rescued by a dude in a plane because he gets the survival pack, and inside the survival pack is an emergency transponder beacon. Not that he knows it, but he kind of flicks it on and off. He's like, oh, this isn't working. But this guy detects it and comes and rescues him. But then there's an alternative universe, the sequel, which is that he didn't find that, and so he had to live through the Canadian winter. And spoiler alert, I think that book is one of the best books I've ever read, at least for my taste, and we'll be reviewing that in the next one. But in conclusion, this book's very short. It's really, really good. It's a fantastic book in its own right, but as a member of its genre, it's perhaps some of the best ever written, in my opinion, my humble opinion, and it's really, really good, so read it.